Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
This is ACC Nation's Georgia Tech football preview with the publisher of JacketsOnline.com and writer for Rivals and Yahoo Sports. He covers Georgia Tech and Alabama recruiting, football, and basketball. He's a Heisman Trophy voter and a member of the Football Writers Association of America. Here to take a look at the 2024 version of the Ramblin' Wreck is our special guest, Kelly Quinlan. Kelly, good to have you back, man.
What's up, guys?
That's doing well. Looking forward to the season here, and we'll get right into it here. Another, I'd say, a pretty successful season for the Yellow Jackets last season, getting to a bowl in year one under Brent Key. But I feel like I'm going to start on the defensive side of the box. I feel like where the success of this team is going to be dependent on the improvement of that defense. So, I mean, we could be honest, it wasn't very good last year. So how did they shake things up in the offseason on that side of the ball?
They fired everybody on that side of the ball, essentially.
That'll do it.
The only guy that's on the staff that was on the staff last year on the defensive side of the ball in terms of on-the-field coaches is Ricky Brumfeld, and he was the special teams coordinator and just helped out a little bit with the secondary. Now he's the cornerbacks coach. They went and hired Tyler Santucci, who's a Mike Elko disciple from Duke. They hired Jess Simpson, who's a former NFL D-line coach, was at Duke with Santucci. He was considered one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. And then they hired Kyle Pope, who had worked with Brent Key at Alabama. He had been a GA when Brent was there. He was at Memphis, comes into Coach Ends. And they hired Corey Peebles from Georgia State to come help out with the safety position, defensive backs. So they've overhauled the whole staff. Some of the GAs are still there, some of the analyst guys, but everyone that was touching the football aspect of game planning and stuff's gone. So it's been a complete overhaul. And really we saw from day one in practice going out there, Tyler Santucci literally teaching steps to guys in the linebacker room, stopping plays when people take a wrong step, like real basic fundamental things. If you go back and look at their issues defensive last year, the majority of them were fundamental breakdowns, bad run fits, being out of position, over pursuit, maybe trying to cover for someone when you're not supposed to and not doing your job. Those types of things, much more so than just being overmatched all the time. It wasn't even necessarily a total talent problem. It was just they just did not execute the game plan a lot of the time.
When you look at the personnel, I feel like there are some pretty quality pieces on this team. And I think I agree with you. I just felt like just for whatever reason, the scheme didn't mesh. But overall, where do you see the strength of the defense?
I think it's inside at defensive tackle. They have Zeke Biggers back. You have Horace Lockett back and Mekhi Scott. Those were three of their four defensive linemen. They brought in Thomas Gore from Miami and Jordan Vandenberg from Penn State, who both played in the rotation at those places. And they brought back Jason Moore, who had left to go to Temple and then decided to come back to Georgia Tech. So they're 5 deep at defensive tackle with guys who are all upperclassmen, which is extremely unusual in this day and age for most teams. And I think that's going to be the strength of the defense. And then it kind of radiates out. The defensive end position is a little less experienced in terms of just overall production. They have older guys, Kevin Harris, Romello Height, who they got from USC. Sylvain Yonagin, who played 27 snaps last year before he got hurt in the Louisville game, who's supposed to be their star pass rusher. He's back, and Josh Robinson. So they have, 8 guys that are really older guys that are going to be sort of the core of this defensive line. I think that's the strength. And then it kind of thins out as you move backward through the defense a little bit in terms of experience and things. But I think straight down the middle with the starting 11 or the main guys you're going to play in the rotation, they're pretty experienced. And I think that's a good basis for them to kind of build on. Even at the safety position, those guys are back. So, linebacker, the 2 of the 3 most productive guys are back. So I think that they're in a good spot there. It's just depth maybe where I get a little squirrely in the secondary and at linebacker.
Of the 3 different levels, which one do you think is going to be the prime to take a big step forward with this new defense?
I think the linebacker play was a huge issue, and they figured out how to use Kyle Eifert last year as a box linebacker. You got to play him downhill. They're trying to ask him to do too much early in the year. Trent Tatum showed some signs of life. At times he struggled as a starter, was much better coming off the bench, which was weird. They've really worked hard with him. But there's two guys they brought in there, EJ Lightsey from UGA, who didn't play much there, is a really talented guy. And then a kid named Jackson Hamilton, who's more of an outside backer type. And then they have a kid named Tajay Butler, who came in early as an early enrollee, who's really talented. So they have 5 guys sort of there that I think are going to be the core rotation. And it's a matter of Tyler Santucci getting the right stuff out of them. I think they have the potential to do things. I think he understands how to scheme for them. I think it's just a matter of them executing the scheme and like making tackles. Like it's really been fundamental issues have been the bugaboo really with this defense since Paul Johnson left and brought in Jeff Collins, and it's been sort of a constant struggle.
Have you had an opportunity to see like spring action or okay? And I'm assuming you're going to see some of the fall action as well. So, we talk about this offensive line, and then what is it 4-2-5? He's going to something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's the NCAA based defense. Basically, everybody plays.
Yeah. Okay. So as you said, going back to basics, essentially, making sure that everybody is doing exactly what they're doing. Now, you talked about that front line, and the one thing that I had taken away from everything that I've been looking at preview-wise had indicated that this team had a heck of a hard time last year, and there was an awful lot of problems with, as you point out, experience and the depth. But what you're telling us here is showing that there's a lot more experience because people are coming back off of injuries. People have come in through the transfer portal. So this is not a defensive squad that maybe we shouldn't be looking at last year other than for comparative purposes. Do you see a significant step up for the defense compared to last year, and enough to make a big difference in how this team performs overall?
So, they were one of the worst defensive teams a year ago in the ACC. Maybe Virginia was worse. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the point I made is the offense should be a top 50 offense with what you have coming back. Defense, if you're in the top 75, I think you're in the ACC hunt for Charlotte. Like that is enough of a boost up. Like they were just so bad at times they couldn't help themselves. And they lost a lot. Boston College and Bowling Green are two that come to mind where they had opportunities to get off the field and didn't go off the field. If you win 2 more games, you're at 8-9 wins, and a very different look even to that season compared to going 6-6 and then winning a bowl game. So I think that the schedule's hard. That's probably the biggest issue that Georgia Tech has, and I think that's what a lot of people are dinging them on. But again, last year the schedule was supposed to be hard too, and then it turned out North Carolina and Miami weren't what people thought they were. Virginia was terrible. Wake Forest turned out to not be very good. So you just never know going in right now who's going to be good. And that's the weirdness of the ACC and the portal stuff too. Like, is North Carolina good? I don't know. Is Miami good? Who knows? Virginia Tech beat no one last year, but everyone's picking them now as this sort of Louisville type team that's going to come out and win 10 games because I guess people like Brent Pry and their quarterback. Like, I don't get it. Like, I just don't see it. They didn't beat anyone with like a winning record last year. So like to me, I think this comes down to like I watched Georgia Tech play toe for toe with Georgia. I watched them play other teams really well. They beat a very good UCF team in the bowl game. It basically in a road game there in Tampa. I think that they have an opportunity to be pretty good if the quarterback play improves at all. I think they're better at the skill spots on offense, and the offensive line's better than it was a year ago. So to me, when I look at this, I see a hard schedule. I do see Notre Dame. I see Georgia. But I also see a lot of opportunities. Even the Florida State game. I've been there once. I covered it in 2016 when Georgia Tech played Boston College. That is an entirely different environment than anything else these guys will ever play in. It is a bottle game, and it is totally different than even playing an independent game or whatever. I've been playing a neutral site game in the States, like in Charlotte or Atlanta or whatever. and Florida State has not played well traditionally in those games either. I think that's a toss-up game to me right now. And I think if you win that game, it sets the tone for their entire season.
Will and I were talking about that possibility before we got on with you. So we'll get a little further into that in just a few minutes. Well,
Yeah, so let's move over to offense. And I think the thing that comes out of is, the offense I think was much better than expected last year. I think Haynes King kind of came out of nowhere to lead the league in touchdowns, but he also led the league in interceptions. So the kind of it looked like to me some of the things with him, it kind of is sometimes when he throw one, it would kind of snowball. There were a couple games where he threw multiple picks. So is there something they've been trying to work on with him to kind of prevent those, situations from snowballing?
It's funny. The first 4 games, I think he had 2 picks, and then he proceeded to add 3 games in a row with multiple picks. They were really the BC game that they lost and the Clemson game. That was 7 of his interceptions of the 16 he threw. Those were games where things just kind of snowballed on him a little bit. The Miami game was in bad weather. He threw 2 in that game. He forces the ball a little bit. People forget with Haynes, he's an older guy, but last year was his first real time playing really extensive snaps. He had started 2 games at A&M and they got hurt. He had started another game. It started back and forth. They were pulling him and stuff. The last year he was there, it wasn't like he was this guy that you brought in as like DJU at Florida State that has all these career starts under his belt, and you expect more from him. I think with Haynes, he was learning on the go. And the big question now is, can he learn from those mistakes? He was telegraphing some throws, trying to force the ball to Eric Singleton at times, making predetermined reads based off of what he was seeing in coverage instead of trusting his pocket and going through his progressions a little bit. And I think if he just does a little bit of that, it makes a huge difference. And once he started using his legs more, it made a huge difference too in his game. And he got healthy and was able to run the football in the second half of the season really well.
Well, on that, do you expect him to still run it a bunch this year?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing now, too, that's a lot different is a year ago, they go into the season and they had 2 quarterbacks that they liked. They had Haynes King and Zach Byron who had started games. Now I would say there's 3 guys that they feel comfortable playing if you absolutely had to. Like, they're not scared to death to play the 3rd quarterback if it came to that. And that opens up so much more because you can run Haynes King, you can run Zach Byron now, not be afraid to let him give you some packages, do some things with him. And he is just as good a runner as Haynes, maybe a little less top end speed. So I think that you can take some of that pressure off Haynes King and then use the running game. And the other thing too is they're a little more versatile in terms of their personnel now. They got some different things at running back and receiver in the slot that are going to allow them to be more creative than they've been. I think they got a little too in a bottle at times with the offense, trying to figure out what was going to work. And I think after a while, Buster Faulkner, who had not been an OC for several years, kind of got his sea legs back under him, figured out what the way things were working, and they figured out the offense and moved the ball pretty well. Even in the Clemson game, there were missed opportunities in that game where the offense looked terrible, but if he hits on a couple throws, it's a different game and they're in that game. So I think I like what I've seen from him. The defense was the big issue a year ago. I think the offense will be at least as good as it was a year ago. You expect them to step forward. And if you have that natural progression you see from quarterbacks, I think they have a chance to be really dangerous.
So before we get into the backs and receivers, I've kind of skimmed over the fact that they were able to retain the whole pretty much the whole offensive staff. Were you surprised by that at all?
Yeah, I mean, the one guy they lost was the wide receivers coach that was a fluky situation where Del McGee left Georgia to become the head coach of Georgia State because the Georgia State coach quit in the middle of their spring football. And then they hired Josh to be the running backs coach there. And they went and hired Trent McKnight, who had been the Georgia State offensive coordinator, was this guy that's known as like a really good receivers coach. So to me, it almost worked out in the better for both sides because I think Crawford's a really good young coach and ambitious, but Trent is a really good X's and O's guy. And it gave them a little bit of something else, and the receivers have talked about it, that they really like what he brings to the table. But keeping Chris Winkie, keeping Buster, keeping Jeep Wade, even like Nate Brock, who's one of their graduate assistants, is basically the tight ends coach for Buster. And he's a former Ohio State player. He's going to be a top level, probably assistant coach in the next few years, a very good recruiter and all that stuff. They have a lot of really good staff in place. And I think that was a big key for Brent, keeping those guys together. Jeep Wade, what he did with the O-line was really impressive. They have 4 of the 5 starters back. They have, I think, 5 of the top 7 offensive linemen back from last year. So that's again, the cornerstones of the things I look for successful football teams in my years doing this. Experience on the offensive and defensive line, I think, are the 2 things that are the hardest to replace, right? The further away you get from the ball, the easier it is to play a young person. The closer into it in those line positions, that's where you can maul people and impose your will and have some success, even if things are not clicking.
Okay, so let's go to running back. I know Jamal Haynes was had a really strong season, ran for 1,000 yards, but I don't know about the depth. What can you tell us about the depth behind Haynes?
So the guy they thought was going to be the probable starter last year, Trey Cooley, the kid they got from Louisville, he's back. I don't know how much he plays. He had some fumbling issues, had some issues with tripping over his own feet at times. He has a lot of speed, can be dynamic if he gets loose. The guy, to me, that I'm watching in that room is a kid named Anthony Carey, who's a freshman that they brought from Florida. He was one of their last commitments for the class, and he is a stud. And he's a guy that looks like an NFL running back as a freshman in college. And he can do it all. He can catch the ball. He's a bigger back. He can give you that Dante Smith role, which is what they're missing. The guy that was the hammer in the back half of their season with Jamal Haynes is more of a speed space guy. Carey can run between the tackles. They have Evan Dickens, who's back, who played a lot last year. And then they have Jamie Felix is another guy that's a bigger bodied back. So they have some options there. But I think they can also be creative, too, with what they're doing. You have a lot of different slots, a lot of different types of guys. You can move guys in and out of the backfield with Malik Rutherford or Christian Leary, or even some guys people haven't seen play yet, like Zion Taylor or, even Eric Singleton maybe could move around on the field. I think there's a lot of stuff that they haven't figured out. The one thing they were kind of missing in their offense last year was the pass catching game from the running backs. And that was a big part of Buster's schemes in the past, and a big part of what Georgia did when he was there as an assistant too. And I think Jamal was a wide receiver at Georgia Tech, or was a slot receiver early in his career, has great hands. I think they have a lot of guys who can catch the ball in the backfield too. So that's another dimension where you need to see Haynes King kind of pick it up. And I think if the offensive line has progressed as well as they expect it to, I think that's where you get it. And then they brought in a really great tight end from Yale named Jackson Hawes, who they love. And they have Brett Seither back, who is their red zone guy. I think they have, a decent tight end room now, a lot of older guys. And I think the experience at those skill positions will pay off. There's one question, which is who's like the X receiver. Is it Chase Lane? Is it Leo Blackburn, who's missed 2 years with knee injuries and played part of one season basically? Is it Avery Boyd? Who's going to be that other outside guy with Eric Singleton? That's, I think, the thing that everyone's wanting to kind of find out in this fall camp.
Hear a lot of people talk about this team, the offense, as explosive. And based upon what you're saying here, there's an awful lot of talent. And that offensive line, I think what you pointed out there, the experience, the age, there's depth. That is where you set the tone. And then everybody else behind that, you can run younger guys. But you've got experienced guys behind that. So you're not too worried, except for that one running back who's a freshman. I'm really interested to see if he hits the field a lot this year, based upon what you're saying, how he goes through the line. Is explosive too much of a descriptor for this offense? Is that accurate?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that's what they would like to have. And I think you have guys like Singleton that could take the top off, or Malik Rutherford, who are these dynamic, smaller receivers, but are really fast and dynamic. And you have Jamal Haynes, who can run and catch a crease and take off. And that's where I think you can, and then you have a quarterback who can do it too. And that's the thing that's so different about their offense compared to a lot of other teams is Haynes King can run away from people. And if he gets in space, he's especially in the second half of games, he was really good at it, getting downhill and making the read, making his one cut and making a guy miss and taking off and knowing when to run and when not to run. And that's where the pick thing comes in. A couple of the ones he threw last year were times when he should have run the ball where the sticks were in front of him. He tried to force it. A little bit of like that high school mentality. I'm a gunslinger and I can make this happen. As he figures out how to play within himself, I think that's the next kind of evolution with him. And that, I think a lot of this kind of leans on his shoulders right now. If he can progress and cut down the picks, just cut him down a few. Like you don't need to, he's going to throw picks. He's a little bit of, got a little Brett Favre in him. Like, but his ability to run is just so different. And when he does that, it just changes the entire complexion of games. And I think that's the thing that is probably most exciting with the veteran line and him being able to move around. Buster being able to move the pocket around, I think at times gives them so many different options and ways to attack teams. And I think that will be the counter punch when they get into these games with Notre Dame or Georgia, where they're going to be playing really stout defenses. You got to be able to give them something that they don't normally see. And I think that's one of the things that they have.
Looking forward to King hitting the field. Now, a quick question. Since you saw some spring action, do you see progress from him compared to last year?
It's so hard to say because a lot of the stuff we see, they're not live. With quarterback play, like when they know they're not being hit, it's so different. And in the spring game, he threw one of the what I would call a bad ball that he used to throw. And then he had a pick in the game, but that was just a great play by a defensive player, kind of dove in the line and got a hand on a ball and somebody picked it off. But I think it's there. It's just like you could see it at times, even throughout the season, he started to figure it out a little bit more. I think when he got frustrated, like at the Clemson game, it kind of unraveled for him. And they've got to, if it starts to happen, that might be when they need to put in Zach Pyron and give him a hook and send him for a series and be like, hey, you got to settle down and play within yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's like that 3-point shooter mentality, right? Like if you're a gun and guard, like you're going to keep putting them up. Sometimes it's better to go for the 2, like, and he's got to learn when to lay it up, like, and not just gun for the 3. And so that's the progression. If he wants to play at the next level, that's the thing teams are going to want to see too, him going through his progressions.
Well,
all right, real quick, I'm gonna go into special teams real quick because this was I would say this was a pretty solid unit in 2023. What are we looking at for this year?
It's last year with Irish punter David Shanahan. He gets to play a game at home, which is a pretty cool story. The big story was Aiden Burr, the kicker, and how he kind of took over the job from Gavin Stewart during the season last year. Gavin ended up transferring out. Aiden hit a 60-plus yard field goal in the spring game, which was kind of crazy. He's 2 years removed from a pretty serious high school knee injury, and they honored his scholarship, kept him on, and it's paying off for them now as they have a potential All-American candidate kicker who has tremendous leg and will be able to kick off again. The return game is probably the biggest question to me. That's going to be kind of all new players, as Dominic Blaylock did a lot of it last year. Christian Leary returns kicks, but had some judgment issues there. So I'm curious what they do in that room because they have some more options now of guys that can return kicks. And that was something they did not have settled in the spring. They wanted to look at it in fall camp and make some decisions about who they wanted back there returning. But I think overall the operation's pretty good. They have most of the guys back. They have their 2 main snappers back. And the holder situation, Shanahan's Burr's holder. So I think it works out really well for them with what they have right now.
And looking at just kind of looking ahead, I see Georgia Tech is currently 23rd in the class of 2025 for recruiting. What are you hearing from the recruits as to what they like about this coaching staff?
I think it's like Brent is very black and white about things. Like he lets you know where you stand. He reminds me a lot of Paul Johnson in that way. It's that old school coach mentality. I'm not going to BS you or tell you things that you want to hear. I'm going to tell you how it is. And it's interesting because his talking points are starting to come back. I was in Jacksonville. We have an event down there with called our 5-Star Challenge. And so one of the things I found interesting is I was talking to a 2026 kid who's probably going to end up at Georgia, Florida State, Alabama, one of those places. But 5-star kids were citing back to me Brent Key's sales pitch, basically about the program and the culture and what they're doing there and the 40-year plan and all of those things. And it was interesting to hear it from somebody that's on that high of a level. It's an in-state Georgia kid that wouldn't have given Georgia Tech the time of day maybe a couple of years ago. And Brent Key has said to me the thing he's got to do now is make it cool to go to Georgia Tech again. And they haven't been cool in a long time, really probably since O'Leary, really, to be honest with you. And make it fun for these kids to go play football there and have a competitive product where you're developing guys, putting them into the league and competing for championships. And it's a block by block process. And Brent's doing a good job and they're winning some really interesting recruiting battles. They're going head to head on, I think, 8 kids with UGA right now. They've got one of them committed and they've lost on 2 of them. And then the rest are still kind of up in the air. That's a huge improvement over what it's been over the past maybe 10 years. Yeah. And so that's where you're going to start to win these battles if you can keep kids from Clemson or Florida State or even win a head-to-head with Georgia here and there. That's going to be the big thing that turns the tide for what Brent Key's trying to do.
Real quick, last question, because we talked about this at the very beginning, just briefly touched on it, so we bring it up. FSU in Dublin, week 0. I think that it would turn the ACC on its head if Georgia Tech were to beat Florida State. And as you pointed out, that's an interesting place to play. It throws everybody off their game. Any predictions?
To me, when I look at it, I think it's going to be a close game. I would not touch the lines. I would be scared to death of that. I would take the under. I think Georgia Tech's given maybe 2 touchdowns right now, maybe 13.5 or whatever it was. I would take the under. There's a chance, like sometimes those games have ended up in blowouts. I think the Notre Dame game there was a blowout recently, but like a lot of them have been oddly close, and with teams that maybe wouldn't be oddly close if they were playing in their home or away game. Right. And you got Florida State's replacing so much on offense, and I just feel like Georgia Tech having their offense back, being a team that can run the football in a lot of different ways, gives them a little bit of an edge in that weird environment that you're going to play in there. And I think that from what I'm gathering, the Georgia Tech faithful bought up their tickets and the Florida State fans have not as much. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the crowd's like if they get a crowd on their side a little bit. And, I think that Florida State's reeling a little bit still after what happened to them last year too. And I wonder how much of that's in their heads. The way everything unfolded, them getting screwed out of the playoffs, like all that stuff. And then how bad the bowl game went. And, I'm not super sold on DJU either, man. I watched those Oregon State games. They ran the ball like an option team a lot of the time. Like it wasn't even doing the stuff Jordan Travis was doing there at Florida State. So I got to see it from them with that offense before I buy into the Florida State hype train again.
Interesting thoughts. Kelly Quinlan, the publisher of JacketsOnline.com. Thank you, sir, for coming on board, giving us a Georgia Tech preview for 2024. It sounds like an interesting season ahead.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.